Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Sophie Hall, and I am Sector and Communities Manager at ACCA. Welcome to our first session of our Ignite series on social responsibility for a better world. So the aim of these sessions is to explore the key issues impacting the profession and give you the opportunity to learn from experts, as well as connect with the ACCA member community. So before we get started, I'd just like to draw your attention to the housekeeping that is currently on screen. Hopefully you can see that. So as we have a large audience today, microphones have been muted for this part of the webinar. However, we would like to encourage you to interact by making use of the chat function. So you can comment on the discussion and also kind of connect with each other. You can kind of introduce yourself or share your LinkedIn details. There will be time for questions, so if you have anything you'd like to put to the panel, you can submit these via the Q&A function, which you should see just along the top of your screen with the little Q&A icon. And I think that's everything. So on to today's session, so following ACCA's recent Accounting for Society's Value report, our panel will be discussing the S in ESG and examining the role of finance professionals in driving social responsibilities of organisations. And chairing today is the author of the report and ACCA Senior Insights Manager, Clive Webb. So Clive, over to you.
Thank you, Sophie, and welcome everybody to this webinar. It's really nice to be talking to you today. The social agenda, I suppose the best way to start characterizing it is to think of three siblings, the E, the S, and the G, and the family in which those siblings sit is part of the world in which we inhabit. And over the past few years, the S, if you like, as the older sibling, has been part of a conversation that we're perhaps very used to and is quite mature in its attitude and outlook. The E, the environmental sibling, the middle child, perhaps is the noisiest one of the three and tends to dominate the conversation and perhaps drowns out the view of the social agenda as well. And the G, the third, is the youngest sibling that's trying to tie the family together and to bring a sense of cohesion amongst the three siblings. And in many senses, that analogy works for me in the sense that we've long talked about the social agenda and we've long talked about human rights and we've talked about human capital. But actually, how that impacts the business environment is starting to mature as yet another conversation. So in today's session, what we're going to do is to focus on the social element of that ESG, or alternatively, if you view it as a sustainability journey made up of an economic transition, an environmental transition, and a social transition, the part of the social agenda which ensures that nobody is left behind. And the social agenda itself is quite broad. We may think of components of it, for example, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We may think of the living wage. We may think of health and safety, which has come perhaps more to the fore in organisations in the past few years. But the reality of the broadness for organisations is that it is about not only what our organisation does itself, but how in the social agenda it interacts with its supply chains and the human rights of the workers in those supply chains. How it also interacts with its customers, the quality of the products, whether they are sustainable and creating social value in a way that improves society. And finally, the communities in which organizations sit. And perhaps we naturally view this as CSR, but it's simply more than CSR. It's about the interaction of the community and the organization in the way that creates a sustainable world for the future. And just to put this in a little bit of context, a lot of countries are becoming increasingly concerned about the impact of human rights in supply chains. If you look at the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which were published in 2011, they give you a view of the responsibilities of the state, the organization, and the individual, and how the individual can seek redress for the actions of the organization and the state. And the reality of some of this, for example, is that in the US, around about $490 million worth of goods have been impounded between the end of February and the end of May by US Customs and Borders officials, simply on the suspicion that human rights and forced labor are being violated in the preparation of those goods, in the manufacture of those goods. And therefore, across those 2,000 shipments, it's a sense of there is real economic questions about the social agenda and about the society we want to build. Now, to explore all of those thoughts, and I'm sure many more, I'm joined by a really excellent panel. And to enable me to introduce them, I'm going to start by asking each of them in turn how they would define the social agenda in the context of their organizations. And our panel is made up of a wide range of people from various different sectors. And I'm delighted to start by introducing Chibuzo Okapala, who is the Director of Finance and IT at Vibrant. So, Chibuzo, how do you define the social agenda in the context of the organization that you work for at present?
Thank you, Clive. Good morning, everyone. I think for me, being a charity, especially a charity that looks after people, where people are the focus of what we do, we are concerned about three main aspects of it. One is our staff who deliver the quality service. So we always make sure to think about providing the right working environment, diversity. That's all part of the agenda, and the feeling that we have to make the workforce or people who work for us, including myself and everybody else, feel a part of the team, feel that they belong and have a chance. And then we talk of the people whom we serve, our customers, getting them involved in the community. So there's a sense that we, our customers, those whom we provide services to, the local authority, and the community all have a part to play in making sure that there's this social agenda, there's social equality. So we are about connecting and making sure, being proactive in ensuring that these aspects, these people, the stakeholders, all have something to say and all work together to develop society as a whole.
So that sense of social inclusion is at the core of what your charity is doing, isn't it? And that then relates to how you create an equitable future for the people
Absolutely.
that you work with. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. Because we are dealing with people who are normally excluded from society anyway because of disability, whether learning or physical, we always believe that they have a part to play, and there's a sense of injustice there. And part of it is also making sure that those who work with us see the picture of us all being part of it, a part of society. So the crucial part is getting us to understand that those whom we work for, those who work with us, and the community at large are part of the process of getting that social equality.
Brilliant, thank you. Next, I'll introduce Donna Peerless, who's the Senior Finance Business Partner at Parkdean Resort. So, Donna, same question to you. The social agenda in the context of the hospitality world, what does that mean?
Yeah, thank you for having me today. Hello, everyone. So for me, the social agenda is about ensuring you're supporting and working towards that more equitable society. So for us, that includes ensuring that we are paying a real living wage to our employers. We very often look at what we are paying per hour to our seasonals and the annual wage to our established staff, and we make sure that they are aligned with both market rate and the real living rate. It's also about having a diverse workforce. and ensuring that there is fair opportunities for social mobility within your employees. So by ensuring that you've got good learning and development programs and ability to upskill your staff to give them the opportunity to progress within their roles or within other roles should they wish. One of the biggest impacts that Parkdean also has on the wider picture is also on the community. So we try and ensure that actually we have a positive impact in the local communities we work with by investing in them and their surrounding areas as well.
So it's that multi-level approach, isn't it, Donna, of community building up through employees and the supply chain. And that's actually quite vital, that sense of the living wage and purpose and common, and if you like the phrase, a good job is absolutely fundamental to what we all want as society.
Absolutely.
Brilliant, thank you. Next, I'll introduce Nicola Roseman, who's the CFO of My Name's Dodi's Foundation. And Nicola, welcome. So, same question to you, I'm afraid. How do you define the social agenda in your context?
Thanks. So My Name's Dodi is a foundation that supports research into MND. MND is a condition that at present is uncurable and usually limits life significantly. So sufferers tend to die within the first sort of 18 months to 3 years when they receive their diagnosis. So this is an area that we feel has been underserved by investment into research. So this is something our founder unfortunately died at the end of last year, and we are continuing, this is his legacy, to push on. So ultimately, we would like to become redundant ourselves. You know, we would like to find a cure, but we recognise how that is. So I really enjoyed your first analogy, Clive, when you said about how you describe these siblings. And I would see us as the sort of new kid on the block. So we are a little disruptive. There are established charities in this space, but they provide care, support, as well as fund research, whereas we have decided that it's the research arm that we want. We recognise that they are in a great place to provide support and care, and there's great facilities through the NHS and nurses, but we want to really focus and help be that catalyst to get money and funds and time and awareness to research. So thinking about the model itself, our existence is to serve communities that are underserved at the moment. Also bring the communities together, and that's in terms of the researchers that we fund and we support, so they join in on sort of scientific advisory meetings that we've driven and pushed there. So if I think about when we look internally, it's exactly the same as how Chudbozo mentioned around making sure the staff and the workforce are taken care of, and we hold that to high regard. Donna herself as well talked about the living wage and making sure that the value chain. So these things are very important to us as an organisation. But as a charity, I do think there are, while we might not be fully required to hold the same sort of regulatory demand because we're smaller in terms of number, we do recognise the impact that we make. So our behaviour, how we present ourselves to the world is really important because there's a lot of people watching. So I think the model that's described and that we'll talk about today resonates with all of us, and we're on a journey, whether we decide to sign up and self-regulate ourselves, but it's definitely something that's very topical in our organisation at the moment.
So there's a couple of points there, Nicola. One, that this sense that the social agenda is actually partly a longer term agenda. It's not an annual cycle, is it? It's not a finite thing. It is a continuous piece, and it's an underpinning, in your case, very strongly, of purpose and value and return to society. And that sense is actually fundamentally important about why businesses exist in the first place, or not-for-profits, or whatever type of organisation you are.
Absolutely. It's how we feel so strongly about this. We want this disease not to be there, and certainly that's driving us. But then when you look in the wider, the function that we provide in bringing those communities together that's what makes us smile. The frustration that it's not resolved, but certainly it keeps us going.
Thank you very much. And finally, Matt, the founder of Port & Co. Matt, your sense of this social agenda and the clients that you work with as well.
Yeah, of course. So, so thanks. So I'm the founder of Port & Co, and we're an accounting firm who specialise in outsourced finance departments. So we work very closely with our clients all throughout the year. A lot of those businesses that we work with are small consumer goods based businesses, and but I also act as a consultant to a sort of medium-sized charity, Unseen UK, who run the Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline in the UK, and they work with a lot of corporates. So I guess I've got a range of views from those interactions, and the one common theme at the moment is actually looking directly within our own workforces, because actually attracting and retaining talent is very difficult, and increasingly we're seeing, particularly in the younger generation, questions being asked about, interviewing what the company is doing on these things. Then from the sort of the smaller business in the consumer goods, the customers are really starting to look at their purchases and asking, right, what's the impact of this product I'm buying? And then sort of some of those larger corporates, really looking at that supply chain. So Boohoo was a great example recently, a couple of years ago now, I guess, where they had some really bad press around the exploitation in their supply chain, and their share price is about a tenth of what it was. So it does cut across the finance aspects as well.
And that sense of modern slavery being a key factor, and a number of countries, the UK included, have legislation now around this. We're also seeing a trend of due diligence across the HR component in supply chains, and the Germans have just enacted a whole set of rules as well, haven't they, Matt? So that side of the agenda is increasingly coming to the fore, isn't it? It's becoming a business issue rather than just simply something that we sort of know about on the sideline.
Yeah, absolutely. And if the predominantly amount of attendees are accountants, we deal with risk, and these are increasing risks to the future of business in terms of shifting consumer expectations, for sure.
And it's that sense of knowing what you know and being able to disclose and report it that is also at the heart of some of this transition as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I see a range of quality of disclosures, and I think for me, and maybe it's a personal view, that actually I really resonate with the honest disclosures. This is a journey, like, we are all at the beginning. So when you see we've done this, we're perfect, it doesn't really hold much weight with me, because nobody is at this point.
Okay. Can I just remind the audience, this is your session. I mean, please do feel free to put questions into the Q&A, and we'll pick them up as we go along. And anything you want to explore about the reporting around CSRD and how that impacts around modern slavery and other bits that we just talked about, then please do feel free to put those questions in the chat, and we'll pick them up as we go through. Maybe I'll come back to Chibuzo, if I may. Do you feel that organisations place enough emphasis on this agenda? Do you feel that they really link it to strategy and purpose? I know you do from charity, but from the other organisations you see more generally, do you feel that we yet really put this where we should do?
I think it's increasingly becoming a topical issue. It's increasingly becoming important, as Matt has said. It's people are now looking at this and saying, "Hold on, what do you do about this?" But it sometimes I feel that, especially now that we are in this economic period, if you like, where there's COVID and there's inflation and there's kind of money becomes a lot tighter, that these topics become a lot more of an issue. I mean, I give you an example of what I'm talking about. We as a charity look at paying the London living wage as something that is absolutely at the core of what we do, paying a reasonable wage. So, but unfortunately, we are in return relying on the local authorities who contract our services to pay us enough to be able to pay the living wage or to counter inflation. So paying a sustainable wage or contributing to sustainability by paying people what they deserve, what is good for them, what you call a good job. Yeah, it's actually quite important. But we can't do that without the cooperation of the local authorities. And they are under pressure to cut the budget and so on and so forth. So unless we work together to find a way to make it happen, and that's where I talk of us working together with the local authority, with the people, with our staff, to ensure that we work together to achieve that aim of social equality, or social equity. So yeah, it is difficult because the budget makes the local authorities in this instance a lot less willing to pay the contractors, those they contract their services to, what it takes to run the services at that, to make sure that everybody's paid what they deserve. So I'm not sure enough is being paid, enough attention is being paid to sustainability and the social aspect of it per se at the moment. We struggle, really, really struggle to get that across. The local authorities will pay their staff a living wage, but it's whether they pay those who provide services to them, those down the value chain, those who deal with the actual delivery of the service in a different way, whether they pay them the same or whether they're willing to do the same for them. So yeah, it makes it difficult. So I don't think we are there yet. But as Mark said, and we've all kind of hinted, it's a journey. It's a place where we all have to work together to understand what we mean, what that means. But I have to be honest with you, increasingly we are beginning to get feedback in terms of, another example, in terms of just community involvement, because the government has recently been putting into place what they call the community aspect of projects. So that if you're giving out grants, if you're giving out, putting out something to bid for a service, delivery of a service, one thing they are keen to know is, how does this service work with the community? What does it give to the community? How does it bring people together? So that's increasingly part of what we have to demonstrate in when we go for tenders. So that's becoming much more important. That agenda is beginning to resonate across the whole, the society, the stakeholders. So I think it's getting there, but there's still quite a lot to do.
So then there are a couple of interesting points that you raise in there. That the first, this sense that it is about the choice of the society we want to build, and how we fund that is a decision for all of us. But there are also these imperatives that we're bringing in from a government level, from a bank and lender level, about understanding that journey that organizations are on. So it's a multifaceted point, but it's also an affordability point. And that's an interesting balance of itself, isn't it?
It is. There's an understanding that especially the ESG agenda has always been, especially as part of big business. It hasn't yet translated down into the small businesses like us, because we're not investors, and therefore that's more tuned towards investment and those who publish their accounts for investment purposes. But yes, I think we are all getting to understand that this needs to be increasingly put on reporting and on a way of measuring performance as well. I mean, as charities, we publish our trustees report and we try to include some of those societal values. What do we bring to society? How do we manage? What does our output mean to society? So we do have that, but increasingly the government is putting pressure on everyone who are involved with them to make sure they have a way of measuring and including those in their reports as well.
And to be literally, as you were speaking there, a question came in for you, which goes along the lines, and also for Donna as well. How do you currently measure and assess the positive impact that the journey on society creates, how do you actually put a value on that journey? And maybe that's also for Nicola as well.
Yeah,
So, Teresa, do you want to start, and I'll come to Donna and to Nicola?
yes, it is difficult. It is difficult to put a value to it. So we don't actually measure it in terms of money terms. We measure it in terms of outcomes. How many people do we want to elevate to this level? How many as people whom we provide services to do we want to see achieve a certain level of independence? So that's how we measure our impact on society. Because it's so difficult. How do you judge whether someone's independence, how much someone's independence is worth? But the value in it is moving people from a state where improving their status, improving their feeling of inclusion in the society, improving their feeling of participation in the society. I think that's really important. So the way we judge it is by carrying out surveys to say we want people to feel satisfied that they are now included in society, and then we measure that as we go along. And we have a strategy, a business strategy, a societal strategy, our kind of goal, which we set out on a 5-year term, and that helps us to judge where we are and where we are on the journey. It is difficult. It really is difficult to put a value to it, but we look at it as outcomes instead of values, and that's how we measure it.
So the measurement is highly contextual to the organization. It's about outcomes and journeys. And another report we launched at the start of June, we talked about the concept of value and the chief value officer, and the phrase value is in the eye of the beholder came through loud and clear. Donna, from your side, from the hospitality side, from the commercial side, because obviously your interaction with the social environment is about the communities in which your properties exist. How do you measure that social interaction?
Yeah, so again, I think I kind of echo the thoughts there on the fact that it's not something you look at from a financial point of view. It's definitely about the non-financial metrics on this. I mean, for us, it's about kind of how the community perceive our brand, how they talk about us in that local community. We've recently had someone up at our park in Ruda who was nominated for and won the kind of an unsung hero award for her ESG work on that area and on the community impact it's had there. So while we can't measure kind of financial impact, because the reality is doing a lot of this as a corporate, the reality is it costs money. But it's the right thing for the company to do, and we measure that in the non-finance impacts that it has out on the community and the feedback we receive from it.
Okay, and Nicola, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm echoing some of the things that have been said already. And we issue an impact report, so we're looking at the measurements that are non-financial, but we do tie in how much money we're giving to research, the trials we've funded, and the outcomes of those. So we do look at that so that our donors understand where every penny goes. One other area that we've found incredibly useful to engage with the community is to think about, well, what are our priorities as we're setting our strategy for the next 5 years. So we underwent a research prioritization exercise, and we sat down and involved M&D patients, research, healthcare professionals, the broader community, so they were included in that discussion to really understand. We thought we had an idea of where we should fund research, but really what's important to this community was a really worthwhile exercise, and it did help us figure out what that strategy is, and we'll be able to then going forward measure outcomes based on what we said we'll do. So trying to bring the metrics in, they're obviously non-financial, but it's very important for us to do that.
So that that sense of outcome purpose, but measuring the non-financial and linking it back to the financial is particularly important in the social agenda. Yeah, sorry, excuse me. So Matt, another question that's come in, maybe I'll ask you to field this one first, if I may. How do you avoid just doing the actions of social responsibility, such as training and living wage that we talked about, without changing the culture or behaviours of the organisation?
Great question.
Yeah, it's a really great question.
Yeah, so, and we need to be honest about, you know, the challenges business faced right now and over the last 2 years as well. And I think, you know, in many ways, it's created a sort of a short-term mindset about how do I deal with the next challenge, the next problem. And you opened up by talking about ESG. We are a B Corp in terms of the certification we've aligned ourselves with, and that really looks at the triple bottom line, or people, planet, profit. And I think profit isn't a dirty word. You need the profit to be able to generate the investment, to be able to fund these areas. And for me, it's about making ESG issues not just a marketing aspect that, oh great, look how good we are, or a department on its own, but it's bringing those discussions up into the boardroom. And yeah, in terms of recent examples for us of things we didn't do but we looked at, was actually there was a volunteering platform for our staff. We offer that, but it's quite hard to manage. There was you know, somebody came to us with a product, we looked at it, but actually the cost was too high for the benefits, so we declined against that. And then on a sustainability environmental aspect, I'm going to Romania next month, and the thought of flying is obviously goes against my values. And we actually looked at, okay, how do we get there by train? Like what overnight, you know, options are there? And it's just not possible. So I think actually by showing that you're considering these points in your decision making, even if ultimately you don't do them, you start to change the culture.
Is it me, or did we just lose Matt there?
Oh, sorry.
That's all
How
right.
much did you get? My bad.
Culture. It's
Yeah,
not
sorry,
just part of the culture.
yeah, I think I'd naturally finish to
Okay.
say that by bringing them into the board level decisions and making it a consideration of each point, you know, each key decision, even if you don't go with it for a reason of profit or cost or whatever it is, that's how you start to change the culture.
And maybe just picking up on that, something you just said there, and Donna, increasing this is about, you know, your role as a finance business partner, bringing some of these aspects into decision making, but understanding what is financial, not financial, and balancing that. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, it is a huge challenge because obviously, as it's already been mentioned, we are in probably a rather unprecedented situation where cost pressures are huge on companies and probably the biggest they've been since probably the 90s. So there's that constant challenge at the moment between our investors obviously wanting us to cut costs and cut the cloth accordingly to the basically the more sensitive pricing that we've got on the revenue side. But at the same time, the company still wants to continue on its journey. So there is a constant battle between how much we can afford to spend on these projects and how much it costs to do so. So as Matt says, we do have to do some sort of, I suppose, benefit cost analysis on pretty much everything at the moment to try and balance those on what is the right thing to do now versus what might be the right thing to do in 2 years' time once we're in hopefully a more settled economic picture.
So it's understanding what you need to do, but also recognizing that at the moment we have a juggling act, but equally there is this deadline of, you know, 2030 to get us to net zero, to an equitable world, etc. That pressure is going to accelerate as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I certainly think as we get towards 2030, I think that realistically we are going to be more towards doing the projects more than kind of pushing back on the profit side. I think that the influence that ESG side of it and the sustainability side of it will definitely have a probably a stronger impact as companies hit towards that deadline. But I do think, you know, it's corporates, especially as Matt said, we need to make profit. That is the reality of being a corporate company. But we do need to be realistic that, you know, especially for us as a hospitality, as a coastal based company, if we do not do this movement towards a more ESG sustainable model, our business will not exist. So we're in that situation where we have to do something, we have to act because it is the right thing for the sustainability, not of just the environment, of the social aspects, it's also for the sustainability of our company. You know, it's right for us to do these decisions because the longer term is keeping us as a going concern.
And maybe, John, that links very nicely to a question that's come in the chat, and I'll maybe get each of your perspectives on this. In the Society's Values Report, we use the phrase a just transition. That phrase has been around for a long time. It goes back over 40 years. But what does that mean to you? You started to say there, Donna, about this balance of the way you are located, the environment around you, the social consequences of it. What does that phrase a just transition mean to you in that context?
For us, it's about making sure we leave that positive impact. So it's about ensuring that we are looking at every opportunity we can to reduce our environmental impact in local areas, in the wider kind of UK and in the world. It's about making sure that our decisions are constantly underpinned by, is this right? Is this environmentally good? Is this socially good? So looking at the slave labour market, I mean, obviously we have high volumes of uniform that we buy every year, and making sure that actually our supplier chain for that is right, and actually not just looking at our customers, not just looking at our employees, but also looking backwards at our supply chain to say, are we using the right people who are doing the right things too? So it is looking at both. It's looking at every part of the journey as a business to make sure that actually we are making the right decisions for environmental, social, and also obviously our governance factor, especially being a private equity backed company.
So that, as you said, that also links back into your supply chain as well and back forward to your customers.
Hugely, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. Matt, same question to you, I think, because there's another angle to it. What does a just transition mean to you, and how does that enact? You talked about the values of not flying, of traveling by train where you can, etc. What does a just transition mean in this context to you?
Yeah, I guess I'm probably not a conventional accountant, because I don't mind risk and tend to look and try and find quite a lot of opportunity in that. And if we're kind of taking apart the business model as we try to get to net zero and putting it back together, it's really actually trying to think about who are we impacting. So, okay, great, there's lots of talk about completely eradicating fossil fuels. What about the workers in those industries who've been there a long time? How are we retraining them? Can we create new opportunities, rebalance wealth, so all those points. But also, I think the net zero point is a global challenge, and there's but in the UK there's a lot of talk about migration at the moment, and lots of divided views on that. If we don't rebalance the world, we're going to increase the migration, because areas are just not going to be able to produce their own food. So offsets, I'm not a huge fan of in terms of the net zero context, but actually they can do a lot of good. So if you look at things like planting mangroves and the social benefits that has in terms of improving the farm life of those communities, creating jobs for the people planting them, and actually so I think there are opportunities in our journey to net zero where we can give people a foot up and rebalance, for sure.
And Nicola, from the perspective of a charity, from the perspective of longer term research, what does a just transition mean to you?
For us, it's about working with the powers that be. So it's working with government. It's so understanding what their needs are and ensuring that things like, we're sensitive to our value chain. So one of the ways we engage with donors is thinking through merchandise and things that we have. So some of the same challenges that, say, Donna or someone in a corporate organisation would think about. Are we procuring the right materials for the caps, or or are we contributing to landfill down the line? So we're really thoughtful around that. When we work with government, we're actually part of a community in the UK with the other two major MND charities, as well as patients. And we were very successful a couple of years ago in lobbying the government with the patients, who really led the campaign with us and MND Association and MND Scotland to lobby the government for funding of £50 million over a course of 5 years. Now, we are influential there. It's not our money. It goes to research and goes through the usual sort of bureaucratic channels. But you've really got to work with those partners, because they can drive investment that we can then facilitate. So a just transition means understanding the balancing, the books and records, so that we understand that constraint that the whole country, the world indeed, is operating under, that funds are limited. So how do we maximise that? And actually one of the things that we've noticed in bringing the community of researchers together, that perhaps because we are a little disruptive and we're new, we can ask those questions that your legacy charities or foundations can't. So being able to do that and shake things up a bit, we recognise that we've brought researchers together that possibly were operating in silos, and incredible. I think the UK has probably one of the best research in the world for this condition, and yet we did see that there were silos. So I think just even on a softer side, bringing them together, they can share information, so that will benefit us. How you would monitor the impact of that, it would be pretty hard, but you could do it. You could look at well, what's happened there, and what we're even doing with other organisations is thinking through, if we invest in a radical treatment or research proposal, is someone else coming with us? So, we look to the other charities, we look to other partners, and we're seeing there being more bang for our buck. So we invest £1, someone else is doing the same, and so the researchers are getting the funds that they require. So it's really doing the right thing, but not being afraid to take some of the risks, and that's one of the things as a charity. We do have high standards. We answer to our donors through our impact report, and we want that just transition to mean something. So we are, I guess, living and breathing this as we do with everything. So yeah.
So we've talked a lot in the conversation so far about purpose, about the social agenda, and the importance of just transition. And thank you for your comments and questions. Please keep them coming. And we're accountants, so at some point we've got to turn to processes and disclosures and things like that. Certainly, as we've hinted, there are conversations around disclosures. Obviously, in the more environmental space, there was the publication of the ISSB statements S1, S2 last week. The European Union is finalising its disclosures around the whole CSRD, which includes a social element, a very strong social element, and any entity that does business in Europe or has intermediate holding companies in Europe is inevitably needing to think about the next level of disclosure and the metrics and data points that they need to think about. But Matt, if I can turn to you first, you talked about B Corp and the disclosures there. What's your view on disclosure driving action in the agenda? Is it an important step, or should we be thinking about, as Donna hinted earlier on, about measuring the performance and linking that to the strategy, and then disclosing that gap of blue washing and greenwashing as well, I guess?
Yeah, so as a B Corp, we have a requirement annually to produce an impact report that has to go to B Corp to be scrutinised, and you need to verify the claims that you make. I think disclosures are important, and we've seen the Advertising Standards Board get involved a lot in terms of actually some of the claims companies are making, and I think that's really important, that if you're using this data for marketing purposes, that you can actually back it up. In the social aspect, some things are just really hard to quantify, and so I do have a view that actually doing the right thing is more important than doing something you can quantify. And we did have examples of that when we were looking at a B Corp application. It's like, okay, well, we think we can do it, but as a small business as well, how do you have the data around it? So you've got to be considered the size of the organization. But yeah, I think for me, it's just really making sure that whatever we put out in terms of our performance around social and environmental matters, we can really substantiate those claims.
So that's a personally thinking back about the processes, the systems, the data you collect in order to be able to support the perspectives that you're offering through disclosure. That's the important bit, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And I think you know, when setting any KPIs of an organization, you can't track every piece of data. So you have to decide what's most important to you. So, you know, if it's social mobility, are you collecting information from your team on, you know, the highest level of education, areas of poverty in terms of where your team are working from, and then showing how you've changed that over time. So yeah, I think you can only verify through data, and so but you have to pick the ones which are key to you, and also, you know, as a business, key to the stakeholders of the business. What do people want to know about your business and how it's performing on the ESG agenda?
So understand the data flows, understand how you measure the metrics, understanding that they're not going to be perfect, and then look at the quality of the processes that support that. That probably links to another question somebody asked a little while ago, and I've saved up a bit, and maybe I'll start with Chibuzo on this one, but ask you, get all your views. And the question simply goes, what are the initial feelings of the panel as to how much manpower is going to be needed to establish ESG compliance? And I guess the first question is, does this actually sit in the domain of the finance function and the finance community anyway? But Chibuzo, any thoughts against that question?
Well, I think, yes, I think finance has a part to play. We have a part to play in this. But I think it's got to be a collective issue, because, for instance, when we talk of wages and salaries, and when we talk of the working conditions, then we're talking of more of HR thing, if you see what I mean. And therefore, there's no way you can absolve that. I mean, if we look from my point of view, in Vibrance, where I work, the operations side is a very significant part of delivering on social equity, you know, on sustainability, because they are the sharp end of things. So without their cooperation, without their being able to send back the results, the metrics, you know, the values that they are delivering, then how can we even start setting a standard to start with? Finance is just a small part in terms of manpower of the whole society, so of the whole organization. So from my point of view, I think it will take a lot to do. It is, but the idea is that you don't have to do it by setting up one team that does it. It's got to be embedded within teams. You can't say, I'm going to bring in 10 people to look after it, because if those who are working, the rest of the people don't have it as part of their core values, part of their processes, part of their vision for the company, for their units, then there's no way, it's much more difficult to implement. So I think what we've done in Vibrance is that we set out what we call our core values, and we put it in as living the core values. That's how we put it. And part of it is putting the environment, putting social equality at the core of it, treating people the right way as part of it. And therefore, we measure ourselves based on that. Now, the area of finance is more to look at bringing it all together as part of the budget, bringing it all together as part of KPIs that we can measure. That's where we in finance come in. We look at some of those values and we say, how do we transition that into something we can measure? And then we look at some of them and say, well, how much would it cost to implement it? And what do we hope to get out of it? So we are in finance, in Vibrance, my role is to facilitate the development of the financial aspects of it. And I have an internal auditor who is quite good at that, and he does do a lot on driving those, measuring those things. So I think it's going to cost it takes a lot of investment, but it doesn't have to be one huge amount of investment. I think what it needs is training within the team to develop that core value, make it part of the working process, and I think it makes life a lot easier in the long run.
Brilliant, thank you. And Donna, do you want to build on that from a more commercial perspective of, what is the role finance needs to do, and is there an upskilling here or an extension of finance to get more involved in this agenda? I think you're on mute, Donna.
It was always going to be one of us that did it, wasn't it? Yeah, so I certainly think within probably the last 12 months in particular, I've seen a huge change within the culture of our business, where I'm actively involved. Actually, most of my role now is supporting kind of the ad hoc projects and being the financial person to ensure that when we are looking at these sort of aspects and the cost to the business, that actually there is someone that his core job is to know about numbers to help build that picture and ensure the robust project and business case is there for it to support it. So yeah, it's been a huge change, I think, from ours, from going to a stage of where we've seen generally projects happening where, like you're saying, for cost of living, wages and things like that, where HR have probably run it, led it, got it approved, where actually we did one this year around annualized hours contracts, where I was actually the lead from finance to ensure that we had the financial impact of that calculated, monitored. It allowed us to make sure that actually we could afford it from a budgeting point of view and therefore successfully implement it from the start, instead of kind of looking back at it and going, oh, well, actually that cost us 200k more than we expected it to. So I think finance does have a really important lead on this to say, while I don't believe we need a whole new team dedicated to ESG in every single company, the reality is most companies can't afford that. We do need, as it's already been said, we do need it embedded in our culture that, we do need to consider the impact of this. We do need to look at financial as well as non-financial and ensure that the business cases are robust enough to get through the levels of the execs and the investors and then be successfully embedded into the company going forward.
Brilliant. Thank you. And it is that embedding, it is that skill set, and it's a recognition that people do need to upskill themselves slightly, at least to create a level of awareness, isn't it? We're not all sustainability experts, but we are needing to understand it more and more. That's a fair comment, isn't it, Donna?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, if you think about from the finance, a more traditional finance background, I mean, obviously our job has been in the past to maximize profit. And the reality of the ESG journey is it's not always about maximizing profit. It's about bringing together the non-financial aspects that, and bringing it more, that non-financial aspect of finance is becoming so much more important now.
It's that justification, as Matt said earlier on, a people, profit, planet. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Nicola, anything you want to add to that point?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that was sort of going through my head is that our role has been, that of a stewardship. We've, even if you think of the evolution of that from the traditional accounting roles that we've had in the past to where we're going. So I just see that stewardship changing now. So it's not necessarily just the books and records. It's more the things that are going to really change society and make it better. So how we can be more strategic in that area is to ensure it's all embedded, it's part of the culture, it's what we do. And then if our roles become that oversight function, then the stewardship of the strategy and how we get there is very important. So yeah, just summing up what I'm hearing as well, that's how I feel.
And we've explored a lot more of those ideas in a report called the Chief Value Officer as well. And I'm sure Sophie or I will get around to putting a link into the chat, which explores exactly what you said, Nicola, a moment ago, in that people can look at after this session as well. We're getting towards the end of the session, so I'm going to ask each of my panelists in turn to give me 1 or 2 steps organizations should start thinking about taking to embrace this social agenda, this sense of a just transition, the sense that nobody is left behind, and to build a better future. And Matt, can I start with you for sort of 1 or 2 key observations, please?
Yeah, sure. I think the first step I'd encourage anyone to do is start talking to each other and start trying to learn about some of the issues and experience from others. Sometimes I feel we think this is a topic that you need to be a specialist in to understand. Like it's not, and actually, as I said, no, there's almost a a fear of starting to talk about it because you haven't done anything. So I don't mind saying that before we started our B Corp journey, we had values and beliefs that ran as an organisation. But when we started our B Corp assessment, which I'll touch on a bit more, it was like, do you do this? No, 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 no. And actually, you know, I thought we were a pretty good company. And to be a B Corp, you require to score 80 points. I think our initial assessment was about 21. So to touch on the earlier point of resource, we had quite a long way to go there. But yes, on a practical level of getting started, the B Corp, the Business Impact Assessment tool on their website, which is BLab UK, is free. You can start answering the questions, which is what we did, and it's quite thought-provoking, and they don't require you to tick every box, but you can actually tailor your journey to the things you care about most, and there are sections for workers, community, customers, etc. So yeah, that's how I'd encourage people to start.
So use the resources that are out there and use them intelligently, but accept you need to be on a journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. Nicola.
You just summed up what I was going to say there, Clive. But I mean, I think that if you think about the tools, obviously, I think Matt has wide experience on the B Corp journey, and just even look at the models that you have. You know, the accounting body itself gives you great insight, so you can use those as a framework. There are lots of tools out there that you can do to mark yourself. In another charity that I'm involved in, we were looking at this in particular from a D&I perspective, and similar to what Matt said, thought it was actually a pretty inclusive, diverse organisation, and embarked on that, and we were disappointed when the results came in. But I think it is, again, it's just reminding yourself that you're on this journey. So the results will be likely low, and then you know what you're going to mark yourself against. And we are accountants and we do like to measure. So if you take that stake in the ground, this time next year when you do it, it should be better. It might not still be perfect, because what is perfect? But you can see the progress you're making. So I think it's really important to get on the journey and talk.
And measure progress and reward yourself for the progress. Yeah. Brilliant. Donna.
So yeah, I think that, I echo again a lot of what's already been said, but I think there's some other areas that you can look at. I mean, simple things like looking at your contract types, looking at what you provide to your employees. Does it work for a modern society? So the things like, for example, do you offer flexible working? Do you offer different contract types that suit different people? For us, we actually have 3 different contract types in terms of permanent staff, annualized contracts, and seasonal. There's also the side about, which we haven't really touched on, around staff well-being. For me in particular, I've had a rather rough couple of years learning to work remote. My job is now permanently remote, and it's been a huge change for me. So it's also looking at your staff's well-being. So don't automatically assume that your staff are okay. Do check in with them. If you're a manager, check in with them. Take that time to actually go, I don't just want the automatic answer. I want the real answer. Like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How are you feeling about the company? Because actually what I found within my own team is the insights that they have provided me on how they feel the company is going along this journey have actually led me to some ideas of what I could then promote from kind of my role, help us move forward on this. So yeah, I mean, you've got the obvious things like pay a fair minimum wage, investing in a local community. But the reality is, I think in a year like this, you have to look at the things that you can easily implement without too much cost or without too much impact on kind of time, resources, etc. And I think there are some really easy wins around that.
Brilliant, thank you. And I will just flag up, there is an Ignite session around the whole talent agenda as well coming up. So please do join that one. Chibuzo, some last closing comments from you, please.
Yes, I think what has been said is quite useful. Said before, going to the resources out there, working within, looking at what you can easily change. But one thing I want to add, which I found useful, is leading from the top. I think sometimes the senior management would need to almost not push the issue, but put it at the forefront of the business. to say this is where we want to go. Because then by leaving that as well, by showing that they are really keen on it and empowering the other staff people to contribute and make changes, then that allows them to almost like, first of all, dedicate the resources. Because it's one thing saying do this, but how do we don't have the time, we don't have the resource to do it. So starting from the top and saying this is something that is important to the business. This is how much we're going to give towards it, whether it's time, whether it's training. We're making this a priority. And once they make available those resources, and then allowing those, the operative team to deliver on it, to find ways on how they can include that in what they do on a day-to-day basis. I think that in itself begins to permeate the whole ESG sustainability agenda and the societal issue within the business as well. I said there are easy wins out there to do, look at your contracts, look at what you offer people, look at the working environment. Is it something? Is it fit for today's conditions? Just make sure that your staff are well looked after, and then just move the agenda from then. It's a journey.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to Donna, to Nicola, to Matt, and Chibuzo for all their comments. It's been a really interesting discussion. We could go broader and longer on all of this, but hopefully we've given you some inspiration.